In 1797, Henry Cavendish, the British scientist, Freemason, and wealthy grandson of the Duke of Devonshire, created an experiment which he claimed successfully proved the existence of gravity, measured its constant, and provided accurate figures for the exact masses of the Earth, Sun, Moon, and planets. How did Cavendish achieve this quantum leap for heliocentric pseudoscience? He fixed two large lead balls on opposite ends of a torsion balance and hung them from the roof of his shed. By watching and recording slight motions of the contraption via telescope through his shed window so his mass would not affect the reading, Cavendish claimed to have proven gravity. Two small lead balls were hung near the large ones, and any motion observed towards one another was touted as being the influence of gravity. Now, the Cavendish experiment has been widely criticized by the scientific community because never in over 2 centuries since its creation has anyone been able to replicate it. Firstly, the balls simply do not always attract one another as they must for the so-called gravitational constant to be constant at all. Sometimes the torsion balance turns towards the balls and sometimes away, as it is impossible not to give some slight tremulous motion when interacting with it. Henry even complained in his notes how often as he was performing the measurement, the contraption was still in oscillation. Secondly, since his calculated force of gravity was 10 to the 39th power weaker than the force of electromagnetism, from which all material objects are composed, there is no control for the experiment which can factor out and positively differentiate the alleged gravitational force from the known stronger electromagnetic force. In other words, the balls could simply be attracting each other through static electricity, a known force existing in all things, billions of times stronger than gravity, and impossible to control for the experiment. Even though no one could replicate Cavendish's findings, the experiment went down in history as a great success and is still taught as veritable proof of universal gravitation in science textbooks today. Half a century later, in 1851, a French scientist named Léon Foucault performed a similar experiment to Cavendish, but this time hanging a single ball from the ceiling, swinging it, and claiming all lateral motion observed to be proof that the Earth was turning beneath the pendulum. Since Foucault's original demonstration, these pendulums have regularly been swinging at museums and exhibition halls worldwide, purporting to provide everlasting perpetual proof of the heliocentric spinning ball Earth theory. The truth is, however, unbeknownst to most of the duped public, that Foucault's pendulum is a failed experiment which proves nothing but how easy it is for pseudoscience to deceive the malleable masses. To begin with, Foucault's pendulums do not uniformly swing in any one direction. Sometimes they rotate clockwise, and sometimes counterclockwise. Sometimes they fail to rotate, and sometimes they rotate far too much. Just like the Cavendish experiment, scientists who have attempted to replicate Foucault's findings have conceded time and again that, quote, it was difficult to avoid giving the pendulum some slight lateral bias at starting. In truth, the behavior of the pendulum actually depends on 1. The initial force beginning its swing, and 2. The ball and socket joint used, which most readily facilitates circular motion over any other. The supposed rotation of the Earth is completely inconsequential and irrelevant to the pendulum's swing. If the alleged constant rotation of the Earth affected pendulums in any way, then there should be no need to manually start pendulums in motion. If the Earth's diurnal rotation caused the 360-degree uniform diurnal rotation of pendulums, then there should not exist a stationary pendulum anywhere on Earth. Also in the mid-19th century, another Frenchman named Gaspard Gustave Coriolis performed several experiments showing the effect of kinetic energy on rotating systems, which have ever since become mythologized as proof of the heliocentric theory. His Coriolis effect is often said to cause sinks and toilet bowls in the northern hemisphere to drain spinning in one direction, while in the southern hemisphere causing them to spin the opposite way, thus providing proof of the spinning ball Earth. Once again, however, just like Foucault's swinging pendulums and Cavendish's hanging balls, sinks and toilets in northern and southern hemispheres do not consistently spin in any one direction. Sinks and toilets in the very same household are often found to spin opposite directions, depending entirely upon the shape of the basin and the angle of the water's entry, not the supposed rotation of the Earth. The Coriolis effect is also said to affect bullet trajectories and weather patterns as well, supposedly causing most storms in the northern hemisphere to rotate counterclockwise, and most storms in the southern hemisphere to rotate clockwise, to cause bullets from long-range guns to tend towards the right of the target in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. Again, however, the same problems remain. Not every bullet and not every storm consistently displays the behavior, and therefore cannot reasonably be used as proof of anything. In the late 19th century, mostly thanks to the experiments, books, and lectures of an English inventor and author named Dr. Samuel Rowbotham, a flat earth renaissance began sweeping the world. Rowbotham's findings, beginning with his 1864 book, Earth Not a Globe, an experimental inquiry into the true figure of the Earth, proving it a plane without axial or orbital motion and the only material world in the universe, caused quite a stir in the scientific community, and thanks to 3 decades of his effort, the shape of the Earth became a hot topic of debate around the turn of the 19th century. Dr. Rowbotham conducted several experiments using telescopes, spirit levels, and theodolites, special precision instruments used for measuring angles in horizontal or vertical planes. By positioning them at equal heights aimed at each other successively, he proved over and over the Earth to be perfectly flat for miles, without a single inch of curvature. In his most famous series of experiments, Rowbotham traveled to Cambridge, England, where there is a 20-mile canal called the Old Bedford, which passes in a straight line through the fenlands, known as the Bedford Level. The water has no interruption from locks or water gates of any kind, and remains stationary, making it perfectly suitable for determining whether any amount of convexity or curvature actually exists. If we were living on a ball Earth, every pond, lake, marsh, canal, and other large body of standing water, each part would have to comprise a slight arc or semicircle curving downwards from the central summit. If the ball Earth were truly 25,000 miles in circumference, as claimed by heliocentrists, then spherical trigonometry dictates the surface of all standing water must curve downwards an easily measurable 8 inches per mile, multiplied by the square of the distance. This means along a 6-mile channel of standing water, the Earth would have to curve 16 feet 8 inches downwards from one end to the other, and or dip 6 feet on either end from the central peak, depending where the measurement is taken. Rowbotham tested first by standing in the water holding a telescope 8 inches above the surface, while his partner rowed away from him in a small boat with a 5-foot-tall flag attached. If the Earth was indeed a globe 25,000 miles in circumference, by the time the boat reached Welney Bridge 6 miles away, the entire boat and flag should have been completely invisible, hidden behind a 6-foot-tall mass of curved water. In reality, however, every time tested, the entire boat and flag remained visible from start to finish. In a second experiment, Dr. Rowbotham placed 7 flags along the edge of the water, each 1 mile distant from the next, with their tops positioned 5 feet above the surface, and stood with his telescope behind the first. If the Earth was a globe 25,000 miles in circumference, each successive flag would have to decline a definite and determined amount below the last. The first and second flags established the line of sight. Then the third should fall 8 inches below the second, the fourth flag 32 inches below, the fifth 6 feet, the sixth 10 feet 8 inches, and the seventh flag should be a clear 16 feet 8 inches below the line of sight. Even if the Earth was a globe of 100,000 miles, an amount of easily measurable curvature should and would still be evident in this experiment. But the reality is, not a single inch of curvature was detected, and the flags all lined up perfectly as consistent with a flat plane. In 1870, one of Rowbotham's supporters, an English scientist of the Royal Academy named John Hampden, offered a public wager of £500 to anyone who thought they could prove the Earth spherical by repeating the Bedford Level experiment. Alfred Russel Wallace, a fellow English scientist, ardent evolutionist, and personal friend of Charles Darwin, accepted Hampden's wager, and the two met with referees to decide the matter at the Bedford Level. The original plan was to repeat Rowbotham's flag experiment, but after hours of attempting to align them one on each mile marker, upon looking through the telescope, quote, they could not even judge which was which, let alone decide whether the line of sight along them was flat or curved. Heated debate ensued, an angry quarrel followed, and the experiment descended into a farce. They called it a day, but a week later reconvened, this time Wallace setting new parameters for the experiment, which had never been tested or approved by Rowbotham or Hampden. Wallace hung a large calico sheet from the old Bedford Bridge, with a thick black line painted across its center, and positioned his telescope 6 miles south at Welney Bridge at the same elevation. Then, halfway between these 2 points, Wallace placed a long red pole topped with a marker disc designed to fall in line with the black painted marker and telescope. All of these he placed at a masonically significant 13 feet 3 inches above the water. Wallace's plan was to view the marker disk and black line through the telescope, and if the middle marker appeared below the line of sight, this would be taken as proof of the water's flat surface, and if the middle marker appeared above the line of sight, it would be taken as proof of Earth's curvature. Hampton immediately took issue with this new method of allegedly determining curvature, but begrudgingly accepted to continue. When viewed through the telescope, the center marker fell a tiny bit below the telescope crosshair, and the far marker on the bridge fell a tiny bit below that. This result was not expected by either party, but Wallace quickly claimed it proof that the Earth was curving downwards, while Hampton claimed the results to be in accordance with the law of perspective over flat surfaces. This time an even more heated debate ensued, until Wallace refused to speak another word with Hampton, gave him the silent treatment, and even had the police escort Hampton from his hotel room before leaving town the following day. The referees for the wager decided in favor of Wallace, and the money was given to him. In response, Hampton immediately published a 16-page pamphlet denouncing Wallace as a liar and cheat, called "Is Water Level or Convex After All? The Bedford Canal Swindle Detected and Exposed." Another fellow English author and flat-earther, William Carpenter, also present during the experiment, wrote his equally scathing 30-page review of the swindle entitled "Water Not Convex, the Earth Not a Globe, Demonstrated by Alfred Russel Wallace on the 5th of March, 1870. Hampton later took Wallace to trial and sued him for his £500. The court formally decided in favor of Hampton that the bet was invalid and returned his money in full. Next, Hampton immediately reissued his challenge to Wallace, increasing the wager to £1,000 and inviting Dr. Robotham to attend. This time the experiment would be conducted as Robotham had originally done, standing in the water with telescope held 8 inches above the water, observing a boat with a 5-foot flag attached sailing 6 miles away from Welch's Dam to Welney Bridge. When the day of the wager came, poor weather prevented them from completing the experiment, so they postponed, met more bad weather, and postponed again. On their third and final attempt, before heading home with the weather still overcast, they attempted the experiment. Unfortunately, shortly after reaching the halfway point, the boat became indistinguishable beyond the haze, and the bet was called off. The boat and flag were visible, however, for the entire 3 miles. In 2015, a group of flat-earthers once again repeated Robotham's experiment at the Bedford level, with similar results. They detected no curvature and saw the boat beyond the halfway marker, but became obscured by poor weather before reaching the full 6 miles. In 1871, after getting massive amounts of pressure from the public to address these claims from flat Earth proponents, Royal Astronomical Society President George Airy devised an experiment which he hoped would once and for all prove Earth's axial motion and forever silence the rabble-rousing flat earthers. By first filling a telescope with water to slow down the speed of light inside, then calculating the tilt necessary to get the starlight directly down the tube, Airy planned to measure the speed of the telescope, and thereby the speed of the Earth, by extrapolating the amount of tilt needed to keep the starlight coming in straight. The experiment, however, would go down in history and forever be known as Airy's failure, because every time he repeated it, Airy found the starlight was already coming in the correct angle with no change necessary, proving that the stars move relative to a stationary Earth and not the other way around. Airy had meant to prove the heliocentric theory, but instead devised an everlasting proof of the geocentric model. In 1887, American physicists Albert Michelson and Edward Morley performed an experiment to determine Earth's speed through space, or what was then called the ether. By passing light through 2 pathways, one in the direction of Earth's alleged motion and the other at right angles to it, the light traveling with the Earth should have taken longer to return than light traveling at right angles to it. To the surprise of Michelson-Morley and the scientific establishment, however, no difference whatsoever was detected, even after repeating the experiment several times in different places. To attempt to patch up this glaring problem, the heliocentric establishment created the Fitzgerald-Lorentz contraction, which actually had the gall to claim that the light pathway going the same direction as the Earth became physically shorter during the experiment so that the time to return became equal to the other pathway. The implications of Michelson and Morley's experiment were so detrimental to the spinning globe Earth myth that they were forced to concoct this ludicrous backpedaling explanation, which even Arthur Miller denounced, calling it a physics of desperation. After Samuel Rowbotham's death, Lady Elizabeth Blunt, an English author, flat-earther, vocal vegetarian and anti-vivisectionist, founded the Universal Zetetic Society, which attracted thousands of members and published a journal called The Earth Not a Globe Review for several decades. Many other prominent flat-earthers of the time also continued doing their best to spread the word. John Hampton continued publishing his own work and reprinted all of Samuel Rowbotham's material. In 1885, William Carpenter published his famous 100 Proofs Earth is Not a Globe. In 1892, Alexander Gleason released his New Standard Map of the World as It Is, which remains to this day one of the most accurate flat Earth maps ever created. He had hopes it would completely replace globes and Mercator maps the world over, but unfortunately his map's influence was short-lived. The next year, in 1893, Gleason published his flat Earth tome entitled Is the Bible from Heaven? Is the Earth a Globe? Does Modern Science and the Bible Agree? Which gave many flat Earth proofs and also explained his wonderful map. In 1899, the South African flat Earth author Thomas Winship published his excellent work, Zetetic Cosmogony, evidence that the world is not a rotating revolving globe, but a stationary plane circle. 1903 marked the beginning of airplane travel, which, had it been invented in Copernicus's era, would have destroyed his spinning ball Earth fantasy long before takeoff. When hot air balloons were first invented, people were told the reason they cannot simply float in the air and wait for the spinning ball Earth to bring their destinations to them was because gravity somehow stuck the entire atmosphere and everything in it in place, dragging it along at 1,000 miles per hour so uniformly that we can't see it, feel it, hear it, or measure it in any way. Once airplane technology evolved so that we could fly at comparable speeds to the Earth's supposed rotation, however, it became immediately apparent that the Earth and its atmosphere could not be constantly rotating 1,000 miles per hour west to east. Simply put, if the Earth were constantly spinning eastward 1,000 miles per hour, then airplane flight durations going eastwards versus westwards would be significantly different. If the average commercial airliner travels 500 miles per hour, it follows that westbound equatorial flights should reach their destination at approximately 3 times the speed as their eastbound return flights. In reality, however, the differences in east and westbound flight durations usually amount to a matter of minutes, and nothing near what would occur on 1,000-mile-per-hour spinning ball Earth. For example, flights eastward with the alleged spin of the ball Earth from Tokyo to LA take an average of 10.5 hours. Therefore, the return flights westwards against the alleged spin should take an average of 5.25 hours, but in actual fact, take an average of 11.5 hours. Also of note, if Earth were a globe, there are several flights in the southern hemisphere which would have the quickest, straightest path over the Antarctic continent, such as Santiago, Chile to Sydney, Australia. Instead of taking the shortest, quickest route in a straight line over Antarctica, all such flights detour all manner of directions away from Antarctica instead, claiming the temperatures too cold for airplane travel. Considering the fact that there are plenty of flights to, from, and over Antarctica, and NASA claims to have technology keeping them in conditions far colder and far hotter than any experienced on Earth, such an excuse is clearly just an excuse, and these flights aren't made because they are impossible. If the Earth was a ball and Antarctica was too cold to fly over, the only logical way to fly from Sydney to Santiago would be a straight shot over the Pacific, staying in the southern hemisphere the entire way. Refueling could be done in New Zealand or other southern hemisphere destinations along the way if absolutely necessary. In actual fact, however, Santiago to Sydney flights go into the northern hemisphere, making stopovers at LAX and other North American airports before continuing back down to the southern hemisphere. Such ridiculously wayward detours make no sense on the globe, but make perfect sense and form nearly straight lines when shown on a flat Earth map. On a ball Earth, Johannesburg, South Africa to Perth, Australia should be a straight shot over the Indian Ocean, with convenient refueling possibilities on Mauritius or Madagascar. In actual practice, however, most Johannesburg to Perth flights curiously stop over either in Dubai, Hong Kong, or Malaysia, all of which make no sense on the ball, but are completely understandable when mapped on a flat Earth. A casual study of other South Hemisphere flight paths and stopover points will prove to even the most staunch skeptic the clear illegitimacy of globe map projections. Building on Michelson and Morley's experiment, In 1913, French physicist Georges Sagnac again proved the existence of the ether and the stillness of Earth by using a beam splitter to send light in opposite directions around a path, recombining them, then observing their interference fringes, first while stationary and then while rotating the entire experiment table 2 revolutions per second. The changes in interference patterns between the moving and non-moving trials proved that the light, and therefore the Earth, was stationary. In 1914, William Westfield wrote his geocentric classic, Does the Earth Rotate? No! And when Gerard Hickson's masterpiece, Kings Dethroned, A History of the Evolution of Astronomy from the Time of the Roman Empire up to the Present Day, was published in 1922, the heliocentric theory of the universe was on its last legs. In 1925, the Michelson-Gale experiment again vouched for a stationary Earth, and it was clear to the establishment that they needed something big to bring public opinion back their way. In 1916, a Jewish physicist named Albert Einstein had published his General Theory of Relativity, a brilliant revision of heliocentrism which, in one philosophical swoop, abolished the ether from scientific study, replacing it with a form of relativism which allowed for heliocentrism and geocentrism to hold equal merit. If there was no absolute etheric medium within which all things exist, then hypothetically one could postulate complete relativism with regard to the movement of 2 objects, such as the Earth and Sun. In one philosophical leap, with no scientific evidence to support it, Einstein and the heliocentric establishment were thus able to sweep Airy's failure, Michelson-Morley, Sagnac, and Gale all conveniently under the carpet and pretend they didn't exist, simply by claiming that all motion in the universe was relative. By the late 1920s, Einstein and his theories had been pushed so vehemently, the heliocentric theory began making a comeback, and Einstein was being touted as a genius and one of the greatest minds in history. Far from it, even he himself admitted when asked, "What is it like to be the smartest man alive?" responded by saying, "I don't know, you'll have to ask Nikola Tesla," a true genius who in no way supported Einstein's relativity or the heliocentric theory. Einstein was even caught lying when he originally claimed to have never even heard of the Michelson-Morley experiment, but later admitted that he had indeed created special relativity with the intent of abolishing the ether and nullifying the Michelson-Morley result. By the 1930s, an eccentric Christian flat-earther named Wilbur Glenn Voliva was attracting widespread publicity around the world thanks to his American lecture tours and daily radio broadcasts from his personal station, which could be heard all the way to Australia. Voliva famously founded and built Zion City in Illinois, a town of 6,500 people, all of whom were Christian flat-earthers. Zion City even had its own schools and churches which taught flat-earth cosmology. In the spirit of Robotham and Hampton, throughout his life, Voliva offered an open-ended wager of $5,000 to anyone who thought they could disprove the flat Earth. Until his death in 1942, there were no takers. After the Second World War, Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of top German rocket scientists and physicists into the United States, and beginning in the late 50s employed them in NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Meanwhile, the Russian space program was also forming, and a so-called space race between America and Russia ensued. The geostationary communications satellite was first imagined in a 1945 proposal by Freemason science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, and supposedly became science fact just over a decade later. In 1957, Russia allegedly launched the first satellite named Sputnik into low Earth orbit, followed in 1958 by America's Explorer 1. Nowadays, there are supposedly upwards of 20,000 such satellites constantly orbiting the Earth. They are allegedly floating around in the thermosphere, where temperatures are claimed to be upwards of 4,530 degrees Fahrenheit. The metals used in satellites, however, such as aluminum, gold, and titanium, have melting points of 1,221, 1,948, and 3,034 degrees respectively, all far lower than they could possibly handle. People even claim to see satellites with their naked eyes, but this is ridiculous considering they are smaller than a bus and allegedly 100+ miles away. It is impossible to see anything so small that far away. Even using telescopes, no one claims to discern the shape of satellites, but rather describes seeing passing moving lights, which could easily be any number of things, from airplanes to drones to shooting stars or other unidentified flying objects. The fact that they are geostationary means they would not appear to move through the sky anyway, but rather be perpetually stuck in the exact same place all day every day. So-called satellite phones have been found to have reception problems in countries like Kazakhstan with very few cell phone towers. If the Earth were a ball with 20,000 plus satellites surrounding, such blackouts should not regularly occur in any rural countryside and deep ocean areas. Also, satellite TV dishes, which existed for years before satellites were supposedly invented, are almost always positioned at a 45-degree angle towards the nearest ground-based repeater tower. If TV antenna were actually picking up signals from satellites 100 plus miles in space, most TV dishes should be pointing more or less straight up to the sky. The fact that satellite dishes are never pointing straight up and almost always positioned at a 45-degree angle proves they are picking up ground-based tower signals. Before satellites, radio, television, and navigation systems like LORAN and Decca were already well established and worked fine using only ground-based technologies. Nowadays, huge fiber optic cables connect the internet across oceans, gigantic cell towers triangulate GPS signals, and ionospheric propagation allows radio waves to be bounced all without the aid of the science fiction bestseller known as satellites. Also in the late 50s, a sign maker from Dover, England named Samuel Shenton, in the spirit of Robotham and Lady Blunt's Zetetic Society, created IFERS, the International Flat Earth Research Society, and began giving lectures on television, in newspapers, to youth clubs and schools about our flat, motionless Earth. Shenton discovered the writings of the late 19th century flat Earth authors mentioned previously and made it his mission to spread the Zetetic message as far and wide as he could. With NASA's supposed satellite launches happening, people constantly questioned Shenton about satellites proving the globe Earth, to which he would always reply, "Does sailing around the Isle of Wight prove it is spherical?" When NASA claimed to have put the first man in space, Shenton said from the beginning that it was all photo and video trickery. When John Glenn supposedly orbited the world in 1963, Shenton even sent him a free IFERS membership with a personal message saying, "Okay, wise guy." Shenton knew that John Glenn, two-time U.S. Senator and one of NASA's first astronauts, was a lying Freemason, just like his heliocentric forefathers from Pythagoras to Copernicus, Kepler to Cavendish, along with most all of NASA's astronauts. Buzz Aldrin Jr. is an admitted ring-wearing, hand-sign-flashing 33rd-degree Mason from Montclair Lodge No. 144 in New Jersey. Edgar Mitchell is an Order of Demolay Mason at Aresta Lodge No. 29 in New Mexico. James Irwin was a Tejon Lodge No. 104 member in Colorado Springs. Don Eisel was a member of the Luther B. Turner Lodge No. 732 in Ohio. Gordon Cooper was a Master Mason in Carbondale Lodge No. 82 in Colorado. Virgil Grissom was a Master Mason from Mitchell Lodge No. 228 in Indiana. Walter Shira Jr. was a 33rd-degree Mason at Canaveral Lodge No. 339 in Florida. Thomas Stafford is a Mason at Western Star Lodge No. 138 in Oklahoma. Paul Weitz is from Lawrence Lodge No. 708 in Pennsylvania. C. Fred Kleineknecht, the head of NASA during the Apollo program, shortly thereafter became Sovereign Grand Commander of the Council of the 33rd Degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry of the Southern Jurisdiction. NASA astronauts Neil Armstrong, Alan Shepard, William Pogue, Vance Brand, and Anthony England all had fathers who were Freemasons as well. The amount of astronauts known to be Freemasons or from Freemasonic families is astonishing. It is likely that more astronauts and people of key importance in NASA are affiliated with the Brotherhood as well, but not so open about their membership. For there to be this many Masons, members of the world's largest and oldest secret society, involved with the promotion and propagation of this globalist heliocentric doctrine from its outset to modern times, should raise some serious suspicion. Before the first Apollo missions ever even cleared the launch pad, 11 NASA astronauts died in highly suspicious accidents. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White were all cremated together in an Apollo capsule fire during a completely unnecessary and dangerous test where they were strapped down and locked into a 100% oxygen chamber which incinerated the three of them to death in seconds. 7 other astronauts, Ted Freeman, Charles Bassett, Elliot See., Russell Rogers, Clifton Williams, Michael Adams, and Robert Lawrence, died in 6 separate airplane crashes, and Ed Gibbons in a car crash. 8 of these deaths were in 1967 alone. So many astronauts coincidentally dying under such circumstances is highly unlikely, and lends credence to the idea that these were intentional hits by the Masons trying to find the right people to sell their hoax. One of the most outspoken of the fallen astronauts was Gus Grissom. By 1967, Grissom had become increasingly irritated and vocally negative about NASA's chances of ever landing a man on the moon. He stated the odds were pretty slim, and famously hung a lemon on the Apollo capsule after it repeatedly failed safety testing procedures. Grissom threatened to go public with his complaints about the LEM, and even told his wife Betty, quote, "If there ever is a serious accident in the space program, it's likely to be me." Right after his murder, government agents raided Grissom's house before anyone had been informed about the fire or his death. They removed all his personal papers and his diary, never to be returned. From 1969 to 1972, the Freemasons at NASA claimed to have landed 6 of their Apollo missions on the moon. With this ingenious deception, a bit of rocket technology, a bunch of lying Freemasons, and photographs taken through a round window, with this one psyop, NASA managed to convince nearly everyone on Earth that they live on a spinning ball. However, in the documentary A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, you can watch official leaked NASA footage showing Apollo 11 astronauts Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins for almost an hour using transparencies and camera tricks to fake shots of around Earth. They communicate over audio with control in Houston about how to accurately stage the shot, and someone keeps prompting them on how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired effect. First they blacked out all the windows, except for a downward-facing circular one, which they aimed the camera towards from several feet away. This created the illusion of a ball-shaped Earth surrounded by the blackness of space, when in fact it was simply a round window in their dark cabin. Neil Armstrong claimed at this point to be 130,000 miles from Earth, halfway to the moon, but when camera tricks were finished, the viewer could see for themselves the astronauts were not more than a couple dozen miles above the Earth's surface in a high-altitude plane. These images showing a globular world soon became the Freemasons' most valuable tool in altering public perception about the shape of the Earth. Since the original so-called blue marble image, NASA has provided the public with many more pictures and videos showing a globe Earth, touting veritable photographic proof that Pythagoras' 2,500-year-old theory was finally validated. When seen with a skeptical eye, however, professional photoanalysts have dissected several NASA images of the ball Earth and found undeniable proof of computer editing. For example, images of the Earth allegedly taken from the moon have proven to be copied and pasted in, as evidenced by rectangular cuts found in the black background around the Earth by adjusting brightness and contrast levels. If they were truly on the moon, and Earth was truly a ball, there would be no need to fake such pictures. When NASA's images of the ball Earth are compared with one another, the coloration of the land and oceans and relative size of the continents are consistently so drastically different from one another as to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the pictures are all fake. NASA has many alleged photographs of the ball Earth which show several exact copy-and-pasted duplicate cloud patterns. Cheeky graphics artists have even placed things like faces, dragons, and the word sex into cloud patterns over various ball Earth pictures. One recent Pluto picture clearly has a picture of Disney's Pluto the dog layered into the background. On a clear afternoon, during a waxing or waning moon cycle, it is possible to see the blue sky right through the moon. For centuries, stars and planets have often been seen and recorded, even by the Royal Astronomical Society, to have been seen through the moon. If the moon is translucent enough to see objects through it, it cannot be the solid, spherical planetoid claimed by NASA and modern astronomers. Samuel Shenton, president of IFERS, was quoted before the Apollo supposed moon landing stating that stars have been seen through the moon. The astronauts had better be ready to come right back, because there isn't anything much to land on. Besides Shenton, many of the first people to unequivocally call out the NASA moon landings as being a staged hoax were professional photographers. When the official NASA photographs of the moon are closely examined, it is clear that many were taken inside a studio using repetitive backgrounds, artificial lighting, wires, and cranes. Award-winning British photographer David Percy, photo analyst and historian Jack White, photographer and Nexus magazine publisher Marcus Allen, and many others all put their professional reputations on the line to expose NASA's so-called photographic evidence. None of the Apollo missions brought any extra studio lighting with them on the lunar lander, so the sun should be the only light source on the moon, and in all pictures taken there. In that case, the light should only come from one direction, and all shadows should be cast in the opposite direction. However, in dozens of official NASA photos, there are shadows being cast in up to 3 directions simultaneously, often at up to 90-degree angles, which can only be the result of multiple light sources not present on the moon. Several pictures even show overhead spotlights reflecting in astronauts' helmets and multiple lens flares originating from 2 or more light sources. Analyzing several images from the 6 missions shows repeated background features, the exact same hills, dunes, and craters, being used over and over again in supposedly different places on the moon, as well as visible foreground and backdrop lines indicative of a studio set. In images from Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin can be seen wearing different color gloves and different length boots in pictures that were supposedly taken within minutes of each other. If Buzz was really in the vacuum of space in a pressurized spacesuit, he certainly would not have had the time or reason to depressurize and repressurize his suit just to make such fashion adjustments. Some pictures show the lunar rover with no tracks anywhere around it. Others show rover tracks all over the foreground while it is yet to be unpacked and unloaded. A couple pictures even show what appear to be sneakers and a lady's heel tracks on the moon, in addition to the astronauts' boot prints. Another glaring mistake is that none of NASA's images or videos show stars in the background as they should, just complete blackness, likely because exact star maps as they should appear from the moon would be nearly impossible to fake. The testimony of different astronauts on different missions, in their autobiographies and interviews, just muddies the water even more, some of them bragging about the, quote, astonishingly brilliant light of the stars, and others saying they, quote, don't remember seeing a single star while on the moon. Such inconsistencies, and the fact that none of NASA's moon pictures feature stars or planets in their appropriate positions, should raise a red flag that these astronauts were not on the moon. Many pictures of the sun on the moon are clearly spotlights and not the sun. Some images show studio lighting lens flares or studio lighting reflecting off a black background. One image clearly shows a shadow on the ceiling of space as the lunar lander lifts off. Many images show shadows of reticule crosshairs suspended in air over a print underneath, proving them to be doctored and not originals as claimed. Images of the lunar lander supposedly on the moon shows a pathetic 1969 attempt at creating high-tech futuristic-looking equipment using what appears to be construction paper, gold foil, scotch tape, and metal shower rods. The idea that the piece of junk shown in these official NASA photographs flew to the moon and back is so ludicrous it's laughable. Close-ups of the lunar lander footpads show them without a speck of dust on them and without a burn print under its 10,000-pound thrusters, like it was just gently set down in place. NASA scientists in their own documents were worried about the LEM falling into its own massive burn radius, yet there it sits with no burn print and spotless clean pads. Even the astronauts' boot prints made deep impressions on the moon dust, yet the lander's 10,000-pound thrusters left not a trace, no blast hole, and no dust on the pads. When the video evidence is examined, even more anomalies are found. In certain frames, light pings can be seen reflecting off overhead stage wires attached to astronauts' backpacks. In one Apollo 16 clip, an astronaut falls to his knees and is quickly jerked back up to his feet by what can only be an unseen wire hoisting him straight upwards. One of the more obvious video anomalies is how several Apollo missions show American flags flapping around in the non-existent space wind. The moon is supposed to have no atmosphere, and so the flags should remain perfectly still, but can often be seen moving quite boisterously. Another interesting video anomaly is discovered by playing NASA's moon footage at 2x speed, then watching the astronauts walking, running, jumping, or cruising around on their little buggy. Without the speed adjustment, there is a low-gravity illusion, as the astronauts seem to float, drift, and glide slowly and smoothly along, but once they are seen at 2x speed, it becomes clear that they are in, quote, normal gravity, walking, running, jumping, and cruising at normal speeds. They simply reduced the play speed by 50% in post-production, and voila, instant moon motion. Not only is the Apollo video record fraught with fraud, but NASA claims the original Apollo 11 videos have conveniently disappeared from their records so no one can analyze them for authenticity. You heard correctly. They spent over $30 billion of American taxpayer money traveling to the moon and then lost the video evidence. Those blurry, ghostly black and white images shown on TV were purposely lousy because NASA insisted at the time that all TV networks must broadcast directly from a big screen display in their operations room, a mandate which all the major networks accepted, and so what the public saw was just a video of a poorly magnified video, and now it is impossible to watch the original. Not only have the Apollo 11 originals disappeared, but NASA claims to have lost all original audio tapes from the Apollo missions, and that their contractors have lost all prints and plans for the lunar rover, LEM lander, and Apollo ship engines. It even recently came out that when curators at Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum investigated their moon rock, personally given to them by Armstrong and Aldrin in 1969, they found that it was actually just a worthless piece of petrified wood from Earth. In 1970, Freemason and philosophy professor at St. Thomas's University Leo Ferrari created the Flat Earth Society of Canada, which he soon shortened to simply the Flat Earth Society. Unlike Samuel Shenton's International Flat Earth Research Society in every way, Leo Ferrari's Flat Earth Society treated the entire subject as a deadpan joke, making a mockery of it, and even creating several intentionally false flat Earth arguments. For example, Leo Ferrari would always bring a pumpkin-sized rock with him during interviews and lectures, claiming he brought the stone back from the edge of our flat Earth. He would say, with a huge smirk on his face, how his boat had fallen over the edge, but he was luckily saved by hanging onto this rock. Clearly, treating our flat Earth in this tongue-in-cheek way discouraged people from taking the matter seriously, and creating this fake Flat Earth Society was the Freemasons' way of mitigating Shenton's Eifer's genuine threat to their global deception. In 1971, Samuel Shenton passed away, and the American former airplane mechanic Charles K. Johnson took his place as president of Eifer's. Charles and his wife Marjorie, like Lady Blunt and many of the original Zetetic Society members, were not only flat earthers, but outspoken vegetarians and anti-vivisectionists. Charles and Marjorie maintained a periodical called The Flat Earth News for many years, where they printed articles about NASA's lies, geocentricity, flat Earth, and vegetarianism. Unlike Leo Ferrari and his mock society spreading disinformation, Charles Johnson was a genuine voice speaking out against the evils of the world. In 1974, when Johnson heard of Ferrari's budding organization, he decided to contact him and wrote a cordial letter requesting further information about his society, to which Ferrari never replied. 2 years later, Johnson wrote another polite letter saying how he was delighted by the prospect of a like-minded campaigner, and said how it was a very happy day when he learned of Ferrari's society. Quote, "I feel sure at the core we cannot be too far apart in aims," Johnson wrote. "I do try to practice what I preach, to think and seek and search out reasonable ideas and concepts." He closed saying that he could hardly wait to hear from Ferrari and hoped very much he would please reply. After 6 months without a response, Johnson wrote one more time explaining again his sole purpose to enlarge his view and getting and holding on to the facts, which would benefit himself and in time the rest of the world. He requested a reply and a copy of Ferrari's FES magazine. In conclusion, Johnson signed, "Thanks from the bottom of my heart," in advance, but warned that if Ferrari insisted on ignoring him once again, quote, "I will then know for sure that you are some kind of enemy of the flat Earth work." Eventually Ferrari did reply this time, but not with a message or magazine as requested. He simply enclosed an FES paid application form. Johnson investigated Ferrari's organization further and found that he was using, quote, "the flat Earth idea as a gimmick to entertain and promote the atheistic society." From then on, Johnson worked hard to expand his Eifers and constantly for the rest of his life exposed Ferrari's FES, calling him a false prophet, guilty of muddying the waters of truth. Near the end of his life, tragically, Johnson's house burned down, along with all the flat Earth materials he and Shenton had collected over their lifetimes. Until his dying day, Johnson claimed the fire to be the result of arson by a NASA agent he had seen snooping around. Apparently finished with their moon landing propaganda, starting in 1976, NASA began faking Mars landings instead. To begin with, the planets, formerly known as wandering stars, are not terrestrial Earth-like habitations capable of landing anything on. The sun, moon, and stars are all simply luminaries, celestial lights relatively close to Earth, and not something tangibly solid that humans could ever walk on. This is painfully obvious to anyone with functioning eyeballs and a telescope or Nikon P900 camera, but NASA continues to this day to publish thousands of fake CGI images claiming to come from Mars. Even assuming Mars was an actual spherical desert planet as NASA claims, it is impossible for them to have safely landed the probes based on their own trials and statistics. They say the surface pressure on Mars is only 0.3% the surface pressure on Earth, and equivalent to the pressure at about 23 miles above the Earth. There is not enough air matter at that pressure, however, to provide any lift for opening up the parachutes NASA uses to land its Mars probes. No parachute ever devised has been able to successfully deploy at that altitude. They simply stream straight back, then never fill the rest of the way down. Joe Kittinger's record highest, fastest, and longest parachute dive from the Earth's upper atmosphere had him free-falling from only 19 miles high for 15 minutes at 767 miles per hour, and his drogue chute proved useless and offered no deceleration. Yet NASA would have us believe, for example, that Phoenix's parachute managed to somehow slow it down from 12,738 miles per hour to 123 miles per hour in just 2.86 minutes before its final landing. In other words, NASA is claiming to do something on Mars, millions of miles away, by remote control, something that we have no evidence is even possible on Earth at significantly lower altitude and 16 times slower speed. To this day, NASA continues to fake Mars landings, and more government space agencies around the world, including Russia, China, Japan, France, India, and others, are following the same Freemasonic model of fleecing their populations of taxpayer money to fund programs that provide the public nothing but propaganda. NASA and other space agencies' rocket launches never even go straight up. Every rocket forms a parabolic curve, peaks out, and inevitably starts falling back to Earth. The rockets which are declared successful are those few which don't explode or start falling too soon, but make it out of range of spectator view before crashing down into restricted waters and recovered. There is no magic altitude where rockets or anything else can simply go up, 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 and then suddenly just start free-floating in space. This is all science fiction illusion created by wires, green screens, dark pools, some permed hair, and zero-G planes. In 1998, NASA claimed to have sent up their first piece of the ISS, International Space Station. They have been caught, however, time and again with air bubbles forming and floating off in their official outer space footage. Astronauts have also been caught using scuba space gear, kicking their legs to move, and astronaut Luca Parmitano even almost drowned when water started filling up his helmet while allegedly on a spacewalk. It is admitted that astronauts train for their spacewalks in underwater training facilities like NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab, but what is obvious from their space bubbles and other blunders is that all official spacewalk footage is also fake and filmed underwater. Analysis of many interior videos from the International Space Station have shown the use of camera tricks such as green screens, harnesses, and even wildly permed hair to achieve a zero-gravity type effect. Footage of astronauts seemingly floating in the zero gravity of their space station is indistinguishable from Vomit Comet zero-G airplane footage. By flying parabolic maneuvers, this zero-G floating effect can be achieved over and over again, then edited together. For longer uncut shots, NASA has been caught using simple wires and green screens. In 2001, Charles K. Johnson died, and having lost all his flat Earth material and correspondence in his house fire, the IFERS was officially finished. Leo Ferrari's farcical Flat Earth Society, on the other hand, continued operation as usual, making a mockery of the Flat Earth subject. In 2004, the reins of FES presidency were handed over to Daniel Shenton, of no relation to genuine flat earther Samuel Shenton, who, true to Ferrari's example, maintains the Flat Earth Society website to this day, where they purport such fantastical, purposeful disinformation as the flat Earth disk constantly rising upwards forever through the universe to account for gravity. Their sole purpose, as Charles Johnson correctly stated, is clearly to poison the well and muddy the waters of truth. In 2008, teacher and author Eric Dubay, that's me, began a website and published a book titled The Atlantean Conspiracy, which exposed, among many other things, Freemasonry, the fake moon landings, geocentricity, and even featured a quote from IFER's president, Charles K. Johnson. At the time, I had already read Samuel Rowbotham and William Carpenter's old 19th century Flat Earth books, and though personally still on the fence regarding the shape of the Earth, I was confident they were correct about the location, or geocentricity, of Earth, so I wrote about it. In 2009, after watching Alex Jones interview and praise several NASA astronauts on his show, I wrote an article and sent a message to him and his producers about the moon landing hoax, and included a link to Samuel Rowbotham's Flat Earth book for them to read. Alex even mentioned this on air the next day, and called me a flat earther who thinks he's covering up some Atlantean conspiracy, the title of my book and website.
The Earth being flat, that's clearly ridiculous. Though I've actually been contacted by some flat earthers saying I'm covering up the fact that it's some Atlantean conspiracy.
For the next several years, I continued writing books and articles about various conspiracies and worked on building a huge social media presence. By making multiple accounts, adding as many friends and followers as possible, joining and posting to as many groups and pages as possible, over the course of a few years, I began building up very large followings on Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, Twitter, StumbleUpon, Pinterest, Sue, and many other sites. To give you an example of their efficacy, you can see here my main Google+ account with over 135 million views, and my secondary one with over 87 million. In mid-2011, a professional artist, comedian, and Hollywood actor named Math Powerland, claiming to also be an ex-NASA whistleblower, created the NASA channel on YouTube. He made a few decent videos exposing NASA image fakery, but his channel certainly did not contain many flat earth proofs or evidence, and there are more videos of him ranting about Axe deodorant, hookers on Tinder, his championship sexual prowess, and other irrelevant topics than there are actually exposing the flat earth. For example, see his recent video entitled The History of the Flat Earth, the same name and comparable length as the video you are watching now, but contains almost no content relating to history or the flat earth, just him venting his various political frustrations. In short, anyone visiting his channel would not become a flat earther, and would more likely be turned off from the subject due to his manic ranting style and lack of factual content. In November of 2014, after years of researching and writing, I released my book The Flat Earth Conspiracy, the first pro-flat earth book written in nearly 50 years. I simultaneously released a flat earth conspiracy documentary on YouTube, began giving radio interviews, and published several influential articles on the subject. Within a very short space of time, the flat earth keyword saw a 600% rise in activity, and Google search results jumped from a few thousand to over 21 million. Soon after this, just as Johnson had experienced with Ferrari, I noticed a wave of disingenuous so-called flat earthers flooding into the movement with the obvious intent to muddy the waters. For example, when I began writing my book, The Flat Earth Conspiracy, I came across Paul Michael Bales on Facebook, a recent flat earth convert who had been collecting a library of old original flat earth books and letters. Hoping to find some good reference material, I messaged him asking for recommended titles, and he told me a few choice books to read. The full extent of our interaction consisted of a short Facebook conversation, yet curiously after my book was published and the flat earth movement started growing, Paul began stating publicly that he was the Morpheus to my Neo, and that he taught me everything I know about the flat earth. He even made the ludicrous claim that my book was plagiarized from old Facebook posts of his. Matt Boylan, aka Math Powerland, also jumped in and had the gall to say that, quote, my entire book was plagiarized from his information, which is equally laughable, considering he and his information are only mentioned in 2 paragraphs of my 252-page book. Needless to say, both of their claims are baseless and go to show how desperate they are to receive credit where it is not due. You can also see from this Google Analytics chart that the flat earth keyword had not made any significant change in 2011 since the launch of Matt's YouTube channel, nor in late 2012, early 2013 when Paul claims to have gotten his start. The moment when the flat earth tides shifted and the exponential growth of the movement began was clearly around and after November 2014, the exact month when I exploded all of my flat earth research onto the internet. In November 2014, I published the first pro-flat earth book written in 50 years, The Flat Earth Conspiracy. I also published several popular articles on the subject, uploaded the most popular Flat Earth Conspiracy documentary on YouTube, began giving radio interviews, and soon restarted Charles Johnson's IFERS, the International Flat Earth Research Society, and published my most successful book ever, 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Ball, which has now been translated into 12 foreign languages and read by millions worldwide. These simultaneous actions, my intentional exploding of credible flat earth information onto the internet all at once, which I had been preparing for the entire year before, are undoubtedly the catalyst behind the exponential growth curve seen beginning here. Later on, around March 2015, recent flat earth convert Mark Sargent came out of nowhere, began uploading new flat earth videos every day, uploading new interviews several times per week, got offered his own radio show, started being heralded by many as the king of flat earth, and credited with starting the modern flat earth revival. At first I was glad to have him on board, until the cracks began to show and the clear disinformation campaign began. Mark claimed the moon and stars were holographic projections, maintained by alleged dome builders, who keep us inside a Truman Show enclosed structure, among much other nonsense. He even lied about me in several interviews, including one where he claimed that I promoted the idea of a constantly rising flat Earth to account for gravity, when in fact I constantly exposed this false concept as being disinformation. Mark was, and continues to be, the Leo Ferrari to my Charles Johnson. In fact, Mark has even bragged several times about being a card-carrying member of Ferrari's farcical organization. By New Year's Eve 2016, our new IFERS had gained over 3,000 members and was receiving 50,000 hits monthly when it was suddenly and without warning or explanation deleted from the internet. As the administrators and myself quickly worked on salvaging our material and creating a new site, the obvious parallels to Johnson losing everything in his NASA agent-initiated house fire were noteworthy. Around the same time, 2 disingenuous Flat Earth channels issued 2 fraudulent copyright strikes against me, which I managed to overturn by filing legal counterclaims against them. YouTube itself began a program of regularly unsubscribing old subscribers of mine and lowering view counts of popular videos. Shortly after that, Facebook also decided to jump on the Eric Dubé censorship bandwagon by deleting my account, all my pages, and giving my Atlantean Conspiracy group directly over to a team of Freemason shills who still administrate it to this day, filling the group with nothing but death threats to me, pictures of Masonic goats, and ridiculous belittling memes. After re-registering for new accounts and accumulating my friends lists again, Facebook has now deleted 2 more profiles, and I am currently on my 4th, still trying my best to spread the word. In 2016, the movement continued to grow, with many more genuine flat earthers taking up the reins and exposing the truth online, as well as many more disingenuous shills continuing to poison the well with misinformation. The new IFERS began thriving with more monthly visitors than ever before. Many new Flat Earth YouTube channels began creating and mirroring excellent content. Now, at the turn of 2017, I am truly pleased with the rapid growth of this wonderful Flat Earth movement, and I encourage everyone to please help speak out, share this video, and spread the good word.